Hey guys, welcome to the Gods Unchained beta with the TheProfesserf. Alright, it's time for our Monday Mythic meta for the ranked weekend event that just completed on March 12th, 13th, and 14th. Let's take a look at the results of the ranked weekend. Alright, here's our weekend ranked results. As you can see how competitive it's gotten, that 23 wins was the absolute minimum to finish in the top 10. We had 12 players that finished with 22 wins, 2 more on the next page. We had 4 players that finished with 24 wins, almost a perfect weekend. So it looks like the bar has been raised and it now requires more wins to finish in the top 10 to earn those extra prizes. Alright, so for our players that finished in the top 20, we can see that 8 of them used Magic, 4 players used Nature, 3 players used War, and we had 2 players each that used Death and Deception. Welcome back, Deception. And we had 1 player that finished in the top 20 that used Light. So ignoring Magic, we could see that there's less Light that was used this week, which means there was more variety of decks in the top 20. Okay, the top wins. We can see that Magic and Nature were the decks that were used for 24 wins. We have Light, Death, and War with 23 wins. And Deception finished with 22 wins to be included in the top 20. In our top 10, Magic decks took 1st, 3rd, and 5th place. Nature had 4 of the top 10 spots, claiming 2nd, 4th, 8th, and 10th place. The Light deck finished in 6th place. Death claimed 7th place, and War came in at 9th place. So we had a good spread of representation there. So having talked about that, let's take a look at the top decks. Alright, so here's our 24 wins Magic deck. We got our usual Control, Magic, Ramp deck. The only difference with this build is this one has even more ramp. Besides Sip of Elixir and Manitoad, we have Well of Power and Crystal-Axe. So slightly more ramp to get faster to the end game. End game consisting of Demogorgon, 2 Hylian Elites, Echophon, and Cersei. We had 2 Nature decks that finished with 24 wins, and they're both different from each other. On the left side here, we have a Big Beast Nature Control deck. So we've been seeing Nature Control decks a little bit, but this time it actually finished in the top 10 with a respectable 24 wins. This Nature deck goes big with the usual Big Beast creatures like Overgrown Rhino, good stats, Underbrush Boar, Pyramid Warden, but then it now adds a control package with plenty of removal with Wildfire, the Hunt, Enchanted Vines, and has big ending creatures like Demogorgon, Vinebound Jotun, and Dionysus. Dionysus definitely adds some late game value, so it's a key card for the Control Nature deck. On the right side, we have a Nature deck that finished with 24 wins, and this one's the usual mid-range version. One thing to point out about this version though is there are no Genesis cards in this one. This one consists mostly of core and welcome cards with a good sprinkling of Trial of the Gods cards such as Jaguar Staff, Dionysian Bull, and Archmonian Hydra. So for the new players out there, if all you have access to are the core, welcome, and Trial of the Gods cards, you could build a deck that could perform well for the weekend. Our best and only Light deck that finished in the top 10 had 23 wins. Everyone's familiar with this by now. This one's our mid-range Light deck, but really plays aggressively. It tops out at 6, but a lot of the damage is done early on with the strong early game and power cards such as Olympian Guard, Highborn Knight, Canonize. At 23 wins, we had the Death Zoo deck. This deck packs a lot of healing and card draw. You have Untold Greed, Dangerous Rituals, Demonic Offering, Dionysus. So this deck specializes in making wide boards, healing, drawing cards, and bringing your opponent down with Soul Burn and creature attacks. For War, I am featuring 2 decks here. We have one that finished with 23 wins. This one's a Control War version. This deck runs an Olympian theme and uses Slayer to keep some key weapons powered up, such as the Ares Runeblade and the weapon from Avatar of War. However, this deck was only used for 12 out of the 23 wins, so I'm not sure how it would have done if it was used for the whole 25 games. So therefore, I'm presenting another deck which finished with 22 wins. This war deck is the aggro one that uses Enrage. We have some strong early game cards here that help establish control of the board, and that's followed up with finishers that does direct damage like Sides of the Harvest and Red Fume Serum. Deception makes a return with 22 wins. This one follows the typical hit and rush aggro version with Shadow of Lethanon, Orfeo, Dark Knives, and Switch Duelist. However, there's some variants into this deck specifically with some Atlantean synergy with Shadewalker, Dwarf Atlant, Face Touch Golem, and it tops out with a 9-drop of Iris, Queen of Chaos. So this card was recently buffed. I'll have to admit I'm not too familiar with this deck and how the 9-drop fits into it. I am familiar with the early aggro version, so I'm not sure how often this deck goes into the final game. Maybe you could think of Iris as an insurance for the late game. An interesting thing to note here is that this deck includes some big creatures like Wetland Ogre, Helios Battlesworn, Inconspicuous Carriage, and I think that takes advantage of the Elixir of the Snake, which gives each of them a plus to each of their attack for some surprise burst damage. Alright, so taking a look at our meta for the ranked weekend, we can see that Magic still remains dominant with a 53.7% win rate. It has a strong win rate over some of the gods and almost 50% versus Light. Death and Nature also have a 50% win rate. You have Death targeting the Nature players, and then the Nature players targeting Deception, War, and Light, with a really good win rate against those three. So with the diversity of decks that were used this past ranked weekend, some of the Light players used other decks, and we can see that Light's overall win rate went down, but still remains pretty strong against Magic and Death. So it's a little bit interesting that Light wasn't played as much. We do have two things to think about. First one was a balanced patch was released earlier this week before the ranked weekend that saw some nerfs that targeted Light. However, as we saw with our top deck, the best Light deck still finished with 23 out of 25 wins. So those are some considerations to think about whether or not you want to use Light, is that how much was the impact of the balance changes, but at the same time, Light was still able to post some pretty good numbers. So again, here's our top players, and we had many more that had 20 or more wins, several pages worth. So it's amazing to see how competitive it's gotten and how much higher the bar has been raised. Now we're requiring 23 wins to finish in the top 10. Congratulations to our players, and good luck on your card pools.